Hey guys, today we're going to be running through the Pit of Heresy dungeon solo, and I'll be giving tips on how to beat it flawless for every class. Before we begin, I want to make a note of a few things. If you leave the activity, get kicked for idling, or a player joins you mid-run, you will not qualify for the solo or the flawless run. If you're going for either of these triumphs, you have to complete the dungeon completely solo in one full run without leaving. Secondly, there is a glitch mainly affecting PC where the game can kill you while you're transitioning from the first encounter space to the second. It's after you enter the corridor in the giant wall just before you land down in the tunnel section. Until this issue is patched, the temporary fixes appear to be lowering your frames per second to 30 or facing the wall and slowly crouch walking through the loading zone. Unfortunately, those methods don't always work, and I've been killed dozens of times from this loading zone glitch, so if you're on PC and you're looking to give this a try, I'd say if you can make it through the loading zone on your first go without any trouble, then great. Otherwise, if you die, I would honestly just wait for a fix. I also want to cover a few tricks you can use within the dungeon that may not be known about by everyone. First is sword flying. Using this particular sword from the Green Knights in this dungeon, any class is able to sword fly by spamming the melee button. As long as you have ammo, it's going to keep you suspended, and swinging it can break your fall if you run out of a jump or boost. Warlocks can also skate by using this sword, or any regular sword, and also the void charges later on in the dungeon. To skate and move around extremely quickly, press the jump button while moving forwards, then melee immediately followed by another jump. So jump and then melee jump. Just be careful not to launch yourself into a wall too fast if you're using a sword because it can hurt a lot. And lastly, the guide includes a few mods from the Season 8 artifact. Next season, starting in December, a bunch of the current artifact mods will probably not be available. So I strongly encourage you take a look at whatever new mods there are if you're watching this later on, and try and strategize around them. Artifact mods are extremely useful and very powerful in endgame content. So first things first, on the screen now should be a list of all the weapons and gear I used for each encounter for each class. On all classes, I would recommend running the Oppressive Darkness and Breach Refractor mods, along with the Hive Armaments and Hive Barrier mods from Season of Opulence. If you're looking to make this as easy as possible, make sure to pick up at least those two mods from the Menagerie. You'll have a chance to earn those mods, which are permanent unlocks, if you've upgraded the necessary perks on your Chalice of Opulence. Because the dungeon is all Hive, these Hive-related mods will give you a huge advantage in every single encounter. Since you can only equip them on the Opulent armor or Crown of Sorrow raid armor, and you probably don't want to be forced into using armor that isn't spec'd to your liking, I would recommend only using Armaments, which gives you heavy ammo on grenade kills, and Hive Barrier, which reduces incoming damage by 20% for 10 seconds. Running both Hive Armaments and Breach Refractor is going to allow you to have an absurd amount of heavy ammo in pretty much every encounter, and you can combine the Barrier mod with something like a Minor and Major Resist mod to further reduce incoming damage. My Titan was using Top Tree Sentinel for Ward of Dawn and the exotic Helm of St. 14. When it comes to exotics, I definitely changed some things up in the later encounters, same for all classes, which I will talk about when we get there. My Warlock mainly ran Voidwalker, Bottom Tree for pretty much everything because of that Devour perk, and I also used the exotic Nezarec Sin to reduce my ability cooldowns when dealing void damage, and it's a pretty insane combo when you add in Breach Refractor, which as you probably know reduces the cooldown of your grenade when getting a final blow with a gun that has the anti-barrier mod equipped. I also ran the exotic Transversive Steps in the final encounter. My Hunter ran Top Tree Nightstalker, switching to Bottom Tree Golden Gun for certain sections. Anytime I was running Nightstalker, I also ran Orpheus Riggs, and anytime I ran Golden Gun, I ran Celestial Nighthawk. I also chose to stack my entire armor set with Paragon mods, which reduces the cooldown of your class ability, giving me that invisibility far more often. When it comes to weapons, it's pretty clear what the meta is: Izanagi's Burden, Recluse, and 21% Delirium. If you're looking for the easiest time possible and you have these weapons, use them. With a few exceptions here and there, this loadout is going to carry you through most of the dungeon better than most other weapons could. But for the purpose of this video, the footage you'll be seeing will be mostly with non-meta weapons. I understand not everyone has the time or is able to get these weapons right now, so if you can't, here's what I was running. First, the sniper rifle Tranquility with the perk 4th times the charm. I would trade this in for a weapon like Soul Survivor with triple tap, or Beloved with 4 times the charm as well. I also used the Solar Primary Valkadon, which I would sometimes swap out for really whatever void weapon I was feeling. I would highly recommend bringing at least one solar weapon because of the wizards in this dungeon. And my heavy weapon was pretty much one of two things, either a machine gun or a grenade launcher. Most of the dungeon I cleared with Hammerhead and then ran the Love and Death grenade launcher with the perks Spike Grenades and Full Court. I did also run Anarchy during some of my final boss clears, and while this is certainly much more difficult to obtain than the other weapons, it made the final boss ridiculously easy, which I'll talk about later. Necropolis is the first encounter. It's a massive space with tons of room to navigate and take your time. The most important piece of advice I can give you is always take the high ground and take out as many enemies as possible from as far away as possible. To my knowledge, every single structure here can be infiltrated from an advantageous angle, one where you don't have to throw yourself into the middle of all the enemies just to clear it. This also should be the general rule just for simply traversing around this space. It's going to be way easier and much safer if you're always getting the jump on enemies and doing so from a safe distance. It's most important to watch out for the ogres because they can melt you from very far away. Every time I need to go to a new structure, I survey the area and see if there's any ogres in my path and take them out as soon as possible. If you can avoid them, great, but it's usually not worth the risk. Since the pit keepers that guard each room are also pretty dangerous, I also try and take them out before I even ever get there, and doing so is going to be extremely helpful for the end of this encounter. For the Shrieker, depending on whether or not the ogres are in or out of cover, you could quickly just chill in the doorway and reflect the Shrieker's attack from here without ever actually having to go in and fight the ogres. This is of course if you get lucky, since sometimes the AI is going to be a bit random. Sometimes they'll be right out in front of you when you walk in, sometimes they'll be way hidden in the back, so you're going to have to play it by ear. If you're low on sword ammo or aren't able to accurately reflect back the Shrieker's attack because of the ogres, then you should try and sit way far back on the outside of the room and snipe them. The wizards are the toughest ones to take down safely, and this is why I recommended bringing a solar weapon. If the disciple wizard is in the middle, you can pick her off with a sword from the outside. The safest way to do this is by jumping and pressing the fire button in midair so that you can quickly jump out of the way if she begins to attack. If she's hidden, however, you're going to have to use the left and right columns as cover and try and take down one or both of the smaller wizards first. Do not hesitate to use your super to do this because it can get pretty scary here. Also, I should mention that after killing a disciple, be careful when exiting a room. Sometimes there's an ogre that spawns outside, sometimes it can be Cursed Thrall, so watch your radar and be prepared for that. The Knight with the Shield is pretty straightforward and easy. I like to try and take out all the Thrall before I fight him and then let my super bar charge back up. Sitting near the entrance and just waiting until your sword's super bar is fully charged is obviously the safest strat, but you can also do the 2 light attacks and then immediately block, although that is slightly more risky. When you've killed all of the disciples and are making your way back to the exit, try and snipe the final pit keeper from as far away as possible. Killing the pit keeper is all you need to do to end this encounter, although it doesn't actually trigger the end until you get close enough to the exit. Once you get close enough, you'll see the text that says the way is open, and you can simply just hide from the enemies until they all despawn. The second encounter requires a lot of patience and sometimes taking some risks. Now that the dungeon has been out for a week, some awesome people have put together maps for it, this one here being for the tunnels. It shows you all 4 night locations that drop the void charges, the doorways or gates, and all of the passages through which you can travel. I'll have a link to this in the description if you'd like to save it or share it. Loadout wise, this is one of the most flexible encounters requiring less combat and more sneaking around. The most helpful weapon I used in the tunnels was Risk Runner. Risk Runner is an amazing weapon and has a fun little feature where its damage resistance and overcharged state is triggered when you're attacked by a Thrall because a Thrall's melee counts as arc damage. This makes clearing the hordes of them much easier, although don't put too much faith in the damage resistance when going head to head with one of the heretical knights. This is why I ran a shotgun. The one I chose was threat level because it has the perk Trench Barrel, but really any shotgun will do. Whenever entering a room, you want to try and find and defeat the Knight as quick as possible. It's safest to avoid entering a room with a Knight until your super is fully charged, just in case. The Knights, though, are the easy part. You can super them and be done with them quickly. The Ogres, however, don't like to cooperate. For all classes, just sitting there and waiting until an Ogre leaves is the simplest and least risky thing you can do. It's extremely boring, yeah, and sometimes you can extend the encounter by quite a long time doing this, but it's better than being killed. If you're a hunter, you're going to have a slight advantage here because of your invisibility, which can allow you to sneak past an ogre that's been camping a cave exit for a really long time. This is why I would recommend hunters run the Graviton Forfeit exotic helmet in this encounter to extend the duration of that invisibility. Warlocks can use the skating ability, but beyond that, not much else changes. And for all of you Titans, well, you don't have invisibility, thank God, and you can't skate, so I guess our best option is to probably just use the ridiculously overpowered Doomfang Pauldron. Doomfang Pauldron is one of my favorite exotics, and it is especially powerful in this dungeon because of this little quirk the game has. Its perk says that when you get a melee kill with your charged melee ability, you get super energy. This one melee gives you almost a quarter of your super back. With a perk like Hands On, it's probably even the full quarter. Now the funny thing is, holding on to a void charge actually counts as a charged melee. This is true for the batteries in the Black Armory Forges or the Solar Orb in the Arms Dealer Strike. These charges replace your melee, allowing it to be permanently active, so to speak. What this means is if you can get rid of the Knight, you can use the charge to melee 4 or 5 enemies and instantly have your Ward of Dawn ready again, or any other Void subclass tree that you're using. And more supers are never a bad thing during a flawless run. If you want, you can even change back to Helm of Saint 14 after you get your super to get that overshield when trying to navigate past an ogre. It's difficult to give any kind of precise strategy for the tunnels because the AI are so random, and you really kind of have to play this a little risky. Using the map, you should be able to plot a course to get from tunnel to tunnel, which most of the time is required instead of just making one big sprint to the finish, and sometimes you'll need to take an out-of-the-way route. Oftentimes, as soon as the ogre has his back turned or has broken line of sight, you're going to have to make a run to the next closest tunnel. The ogres often camp one area for a really long time, but they will always eventually move away, giving you a small window of time to dunk the charge and get back to another cave area. More often than not, it's going to be close, and you will need a decent amount of patience to get through this. Once you dunk the last charge into the door, be sure not to run too far into the next area, otherwise it's going to trigger the fight and you won't have any time to change weapons or get ammo. If you enter the room from one of the side doorways, hug the wall and walk towards the raid banner. But to be extra safe and not have to deal with this, I would recommend saving the middle doorway for last and doing the left and right sides first. The aptly named Chamber of Suffering will be the end of many flawless runs. The difficulty here comes from having to juggle 3 mechanics all by yourself, on top of killing everything before it kills you. But this challenge is also part of why I love the dungeon. This will play differently across the different classes, but of course the main goal will remain the same, which is to dunk 6 void charges into the door while not letting the totem wipe you. Unlike running with a team, when you're solo, you're going to have to constantly be stepping on and off the totem to stay alive and to get the charges. You have approximately 20 seconds of being off the totem before it wipes you, which is signaled by it turning red and then erupting into fire. As long as you get back on the totem before that 20 seconds is up, you just have to hang on it for a few seconds until it cools down. You don't have to stand in the same place the entire fight either, and as long as you're touching the totem frequently enough, it's not going to wipe you. Honestly, that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give. Constantly be moving. Not moving around enough will get you killed extremely fast, whether it be from the Acolyte's fire attack or because the enemies are just hiding in cover the entire time. Use the hive pillars to your right and left as cover, and don't be afraid to run out and get ammo or push enemies if they're not coming out of hiding. Sometimes a different angle can help you really clear a group easier. We'll start with Warlock because it's probably the simplest strategy to execute. Running Devour is extremely clutch, so you want to stay on bottom tree Voidwalker again, and using the mods I described at the beginning of the video, you should have no trouble getting your grenade back to heal yourself. If you're still using Nezarec Sin, you're going to want to run Void-based weapons to keep recharging your abilities. Don't ask me why I ran a pulse rifle when I could have ran an auto or SMG for breach refractor. I think I just completely forgot. The strategy for Warlocks is pretty straightforward. You consume your grenade for Devour, and then you keep continuously killing things to keep refreshing your health. When you have an opening, you can go Nova Bomb or Melt the Knight with a grenade and your heavy, and then dunk the charge and take out the Knights with Hammerhead. It's not too difficult to survive if you can keep Devour active, however you're not invincible, so moving around is still highly recommended. Getting your grenade back so quickly also allows you to throw it at many of the enemies and generate heavy ammo directly into your weapon. I was also running a machine gun ammo finder and I could pretty much use Hammerhead and nothing else the entire time. For Hunters, things are going to work a little differently. You don't have Devour, but you do have the best crowd control super in the game, and of course invisibility, both of which we're going to make use of. Earlier in the video I talked about setting yourself up with Paragon mods. This is so you can constantly be going invisible with Top Tree Night Stalker, allowing yourself to stay out of harm's way as often as possible. You'll also want to stick with Orpheus Rigs, it's kinda necessary for this. Because we don't have Devour, what I chose to run was the exotic Hand Cannon Crimson. This weapon will heal you when you get a kill, and precision kills also refill the magazine, which is exactly what we need. It also has pretty crazy range with the completed Catalyst. The strategy here is to start like normal, clearing as many enemies and taking down a knight, and when you dunk the orb, you want to wait just a few seconds and then tether right where all the enemies start pouring out from, right to the left of this rock. Try and immediately take out the top left Boomer Knight while all the enemies below are being tethered. Then quickly go invisible to prevent the right Boomer Knight from spamming you with direct hits from his attack, throw a grenade at the tethered enemies, and then take out the second Knight on the top right. Once both knights are eliminated, you should be clear to clean up any remaining enemies that are tethered or that are around you. If you try and take out both knights at once, I found that the tethered enemies tend to escape the tether, and it makes it a lot harder to kill them all. So that's why I chose to throw a grenade after I kill the first knight, and then deal with the second one. Using Orpheus Rig should be able to get you around 2/3 to 3/4 of your super back every time, if not more, which means you should have it ready for the next time you dunk a charge. Don't be afraid to use up that machine gun ammo either. It's going to be a lifesaver for clearing large groups of enemies, and if your health gets low, you can just swap back to Crimson to refresh it. For Titans, I found the strategy I'm about to show you is actually pretty fun. Again, we're sticking with Word of Dawn and we'll be using the exotic gauntlets Doomfang Pauldron. Unlike the Hunters, we don't need to rely on a weapon like Crimson because Top Tree Sentinel allows us to heal ourselves on melee kills and get an overshield. We'll also be using the exotic auto rifle Monte Carlo in order to recharge our melee ability. Just like how in the Tunnels encounter you use the void charges to get your super back insanely fast, here we're going to use Monte Carlo to get our melee back, allowing us to always have a Ward of Dawn for every Boomer Knight phase. I started off like normal, and when I went back to dunk the charge, I would place a bubble at the front half of the totem. This way I could actually stand behind the bubble and be mostly shielded from the enemies and the Boomer Knights. I'd then dip into the bubble to get the Weapons of Light buff and take down each Boomer Knight with one headshot from my beloved sniper. As soon as the Knights were down, this is the time I would use to try and recharge my super. What's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of Thrall and a few Cursed Thrall rush you. Every charged melee that you get will give you a ridiculous amount of super energy, and using the Weapons of Light buff, it should be easy to mow down a bunch of the other enemies until you get your melee charge back again, and then you get even more super energy. Monte Carlo gives you melee energy for dealing damage with it, but it also has a chance to randomly refresh your melee ability completely. This means if you're lucky, you may be able to get another Word of Dawn in seconds. Because you don't have Devour or Crimson, if your health gets low, you should retreat to the left or right and try and get a melee kill to heal. Usually there's a Thrall or Acolyte pretty close by. This worked incredibly well for me, and it was actually a really fun and relatively safe way to play this encounter. The fourth encounter is all about mastering your jumps and making sure not to trap yourself in a corner. Like with the Tunnels encounter, you can use almost anything, though I would recommend equipping a weapon that has some range and deals solar damage, either a solar sniper or something like a solar machine gun. When traversing this area, you want to always try and approach one of the areas with the wizards from the safest possible angle. This means not trapping yourself up against a wall on a tiny ledge surrounded by traps and enemies. Find the most open and safest path that allows you to keep your distance, and try and play this encounter with as much range as possible because it doesn't take long for the wizards and snipers to melt away your health. The nice thing is, all you have to do is kill the wizard for the rest of the enemies to despawn, which is why I like to run Golden Gun and Celestial Nighthawk if I'm on a hunter. All it takes is waiting for your super to recharge and then one shot and you're done. I wish I had more to say about this encounter, but there's not really any way you can play it differently than you would if you're not going flawless. But just like the first encounter and the second encounter, there's really no rush, so you can take your time. As much as I hate to say this, the fate of your run really just depends on your parkour skills. The final encounter, the Tormentor, is surprisingly chill up until you jump into the ring with Macho Man Randy Zolmak himself.
Hey! Unlock the thing! Take the chain off!
Hey, Freak Show! You're going nowhere! I got you for 3 minutes! 3 minutes of playtime!
The best part about this fight is that you have all the time in the world to set up the damage phase, and you can do so in an extremely safe way. The strategy I've become accustomed to running is immediately killing this green goblin here and then taking the sword straight to the Shrieker room. The reason I always go for the Shrieker first is because the Shrieker's attack has so much range on it, it can melt you from halfway across the encounter space. I always head there first and take down the Shrieker as quick as possible, killing the rest of the enemies on the platform. Except I don't bother picking up the Void Charge now, I leave all the Void Charges alone until I've killed all the Disciples. The Void Charges only despawn for a few seconds and then just reappear, so they're going to be there until you're ready. Trying to dunk this early is kind of a death sentence, so it's best to save that for later on when you've got less things to worry about. I prefer to take down the wizard second because the wizard also has a pretty brutal range attack, and when attacking the wizard, it's better to chip away at her health than to make a risky move. If you're at full health and she's low, you can attempt to kill her with the sword super, but never run inside if you're at anything below full health. If she doesn't kill you, the smoke she leaves behind can. Most of the time you should be able to kill the Shrieker and the wizard with one sword, making the next one much easier to get now that you don't have to worry about getting shot from across the map by them. To get another sword, I like to stay far back and try and lure the green goblin towards me away from the middle of the room. You should do this from either one of the platforms jutting out from the middle or from the structures where you kill the wizard or the Shrieker. For the knight with the shield, I prefer to clear the enemies here first with my weapons and then go in with the sword after, but it doesn't really matter. Once all the disciples are killed, if there's any remaining thrall or acolytes, now is the time to kill them because it will make dunking the charges much safer. Because there is no specific spot you have to dunk each orb into, you're going to want to find the spot that is open and the boss and his minion aren't guarding. Always try and make a mad dash for the one that's farthest away from them. If you want to kill the green goblin for maximum safety, that's totally an option, but he will eventually respawn. If they're guarding the one that you need to dunk at, just try and walk around them until they move away from it. You never want to dunk right in front of the boss or it's going to hurt a lot. So for the damage phase, you have a lot of options. I'll go over what weapons I used and then give some tips for completing the successful phase. My first loadout consisted of Tranquility, Reckless Oracle, and Love and Death. A grenade launcher like Love and Death is extremely valuable here because you can get off a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. I would highly recommend grinding for Love and Death because it can roll with the spike grenades and full court combo, allowing it to put out an insane amount of damage. An alternative strategy is to sub in Mountaintop for the sniper if you're not comfortable with scoping in this encounter, and or running the grenade launcher Anarchy. Regardless of class, Anarchy is probably the easiest way to kill the boss at this encounter, at least with the power level that most players are this season. Whether you're running Word of Dawn, or Tether, or Nova Bomb, or Well of Radiance, Anarchy is incredible because it can dish out a ton of damage over time in the background while you deal additional damage with another weapon. It's basically like having two people damage him at the same time, except by yourself. When running Titan, I'd use Word of Dawn with Helm of Saint 14, Mountaintop and Anarchy and Oppressive Darkness, and I was consistently doing half or more of his health in one phase at 967 power. Word of Dawn would blind all of the Cursed Thrall, meaning I could ignore them and focus on damage, and this is probably my favorite strategy so far. It works the same for all the other classes too, minus the Ward of Dawn of course, which means you're going to have to be a little more careful around the Cursed Thrall. So as soon as the damage phase starts, the boss is going to launch his fiery sword attack at you. Immediately jump out of the way. Every time he does his fire attack, you want to jump up away from it and avoid getting hit by it at all costs. Your goal is to create as much distance between you and the boss as possible without stepping out of the middle ring, and as to not let him break line of sight. He does tend to wander around, so you might have to rotate towards or away from him depending on where he's moving. During the damage phase, a bunch of Cursed Thrall are going to spawn, so unless you're running that Ward of Dawn and Helm of Saint 14 combo, you should keep a sharp eye on them and not let them sneak up on you. In order to dispatch the Cursed Thrall quickly, I would often use my grenade launcher and land a shot or two near them. If you're struggling or worried about the Cursed Thrall, this is why you might choose Mountaintop over something like a sniper. If a Cursed Thrall sneaks up behind you, the best thing you can do is jump away. This entire boss fight is kind of like one big dance. You need to constantly be maneuvering around the ring, constantly watching where you're landing and where the Thrall are, and whether or not the boss is about to do his attack. On a Warlock, I chose to run Transversive Steps because just simply sprinting around the arena would instantly reload my weapons and allowed me to get back to damaging the boss a lot quicker. If you choose to run Well of Radiance on a Warlock, do not stand in it and think you'll survive like in a bubble. If 2 or more Cursed Thrall explode inside your well, there's a good chance you're going to die. When the boss's sword slams into the ground, if there's no Cursed Thrall in your immediate vicinity, try and get as much extra damage off in these last few seconds as you can. You have about 7 seconds or so until you're wiped from standing in the ring, so make the most of it while he's standing still. Once this damage phase ends, if you need a breather, the safest place to chill in my opinion is up by the Knight with the shield, since there's only a few acolytes up there and you can hide from the boss, his minions, and all the other disciples. Even without running any ammo finders on my Warlock, ammo dropped pretty consistently for me, but if you need heavy ammo specifically, you can always farm the green goblins as they seem to drop heavy ammo just like the disciples. Otherwise, Hive armaments should take care of that. And after collecting ammo, you can just get back to it. Just take your time and repeat that, and that is Solo Flawless Pit of Heresy. It's an exhilarating challenge, and I'm so happy there's an awesome looking emblem for it, probably even the best looking one in the DLC, to show off that accomplishment. I really hope this guide is helpful, and I would love to hear how it works out for you if you do end up using it. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Good luck on your run, and have a great day.